Hey everyone, Adam here in the Aeroworks workshop, and big changes at the FAA coming up right after this. Well, big changes at the FAA. We're going to be talking about a few things today, specifically remote ID, flight over people, and some new changes to the way that recurrency training will be happening with your Part 107 certificate. So for those of you who may not be familiar with what remote ID is, basically it's a way to track both the drone and the operator on the ground in the national airspace. And this was the FAA's way, or their attempt, to make sure that people are not flying where they're supposed to be. Now, mind you, it doesn't keep you from flying there. It just requires you to have this equipment on your aircraft. And we're going to talk about the 3 levels of remote ID that are required to comply with the FAA's ruling. Now, this ruling doesn't take effect right away. We're looking at 60 days after January of 2021, and then an additional 18 or 30 months after that, depending on if you're a drone manufacturer or an end user of the drone. So it's not something that's going to be happening right away, but there is going to be some big changes coming, and you should be aware of that. So the FAA breaks down remote ID basically into 3 segments. A drone that is already equipped with a built-in remote ID system built into the drone. A drone that is equipped with an aftermarket added-on device, which again, we don't know what those are going to be or how much they're going to cost or who's going to make them. But the second one is a drone that has an additional add-on to it to make it remote ID compliant. And then the third is a drone that is only flown at an approved FAA flying field that does not require remote ID. Now that's great for the hobbyist or some hobbyist, not great for a commercial operator who may have to operate all over the country and may not be able to do that within a designated area by the FAA. I want to read you right from the horse's mouth. This is Steve Dickinson with the FAA, representative with the FAA. He says, "The new rules make way for the further integration of drones into our national airspace by addressing safety and security concerns. They get us closer to the day when we will more routinely see drone operations such as drone delivery of packages." Now, I've been talking about this for a long time with all these drone groups that go to Washington and speak on that. You know, I've always said it's the people with the brown noses and deep pockets that get places. And that's why we see companies like Amazon and Best Buy and DJI being on these boards, because they've got the big bucks, because they want to get drone delivery passed in the United States, and they want to, dump a lot of money into that. And these are the people that are writing the regulations, not taking into account the normal everyday commercial UAS operator. Now, one of the other changes that the FAA made was to allow for flight over people with some circumstances and depending on the type drone you use. Now, they break these drones down into categories. They're essentially categories of risk. And really the only one that requires no FAA oversight is a Category 1 aircraft, which is essentially a small little FPV drone that weighs less than 0.55 pounds. We've all had that number in our mind. Typically, we see that with the drones that aren't supposed to be or don't need to be registered in the US. But a drone that weighs under 0.55 pounds, has no external moving propellers, basically meaning it has shrouded propellers, can operate limited over people. Now, again, if you add things to this, if you add prop guards, if you add extra batteries and you go over the 0.55, you got to throw this guy out. That leaves 3 more categories, each basically that have weight limits, but end with the phrase that says requires FAA acceptance, accepted means of compliance, and FAA accepted declaration compliance. So basically, it's an FAA approved drone, meaning that the drone that they call out in the specific weight class has been tested and verified for impact force and a certain amount of foot-pounds of impact. So basically, they're going to have an approved list, similar to how when the Section 333 came out and we had to apply with each individual aircraft and the model and the make, and they said, this is getting very cumbersome. So they just blasted out a big list of aircraft that fit within. If you fly any of these aircraft, you're good to go. So again, not a lot of change there with flight over people. Again, in those certain circumstances where you do need to fly over people, and you don't have a waiver, I guess you could use an FPV drone. Is it very practical? Probably not. And again, it has to fall within that 0.55 pounds. Otherwise, it's going to fall within a 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, 25 foot-pounds, and so on. And these are the heavier drones, the more movie-making style drones. But they're going to have to fall within an FAA accepted means of compliance and an FAA accepted declaration of compliance. Now, one good piece of info that did come out of the FAA, at least on the surface, is the recurrency requirements for Part 107 pilots. As you previously know, a Part 107 certificate is good for 24 calendar months from the day or the month that you get your first certificate. 24 months later, you had to go out and pay another $150 and $160, retake the test. The test had a little bit less questions, but you still had to go out and take it again and pay for it. Now, this was the only FAA certificate that required this, even in manned aviation. And the only people that were waived from that were Part 61 pilots, meaning manned aviation pilots. They were allowed to go on to the FAA's FAST site, which is their safety site, take a small quiz, basically show that you're still proficient. Boom, you got a recurrent certificate. They are now allowing current Part 107, or of course after the proposed date, they're allowing 107 pilots now, even ones that are not Part 61 certificated, to renew their license by simply taking an online test. Now, these online tests typically emphasize more about regulation. They want to make sure you still understand airspace and a waiver process, but they're talking about a little bit more on the night aspect of that, because they are allowing, again, some night flying with these same weight requirements that we talked about in the flight over people. One of the things I always tell people, I see a lot of comments on the forums about, hey, I applied for my night waiver, but they wouldn't give it to me, or they said, you know, you didn't describe how you're going to talk about or explain with your team the effects of night flight that has on your vision. One thing I always recommend to people when you're applying for that is not only do you have to lay out all your safety mitigation plan, but we refer to the Pilot Information Manual, or the AIM it's called. You can get them on Amazon. This is a big, thick Bible that comes out every year. And it covers all the FAA regulations that comes to manned aviation. But in the back there's a little section that's the Aeronautical Information Manual. And there's a section on night flight. And one of the things that we did when we first got our night waiver was refer to that section. Refer to the section in your application and say, my team and myself are all aware of the illusions that night flight can create, and we've fully studied pages blah, blah, blah through blah, blah, blah of the Airman's Information Manual. That's one thing that's good to include in there to ensure the FAA that you have at least taken the time and done your due diligence to bring yourself up to speed with those things that can happen at night, with your vision, with lighting and things like that, that are going to be different than flying in the daytime. Now, one thing I want to talk about remote ID for my manned pilots is that remote ID is not ADS-B. You are not going to see drones flying around in the air on your glass cockpits, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. So for those of you who thought that, hey, this remote ID is a great thing because now I'm going to know if there's a drone in my airspace, that's not the case at all. All it's really doing is tracking the drone and the operator on the ground, meaning their base station and the drone in the air. Their GPS location, all their personal information is all being recorded and saved in the event that there is an incident. So it's not like ADS-B where you're flying around, you get a blip on the screen, it tells you there's something above or below you or this far away. So don't get remote ID confused with ADS-B, which some drones like the DJI the Matrice series do have a version of ADS-B where it takes it in, it doesn't broadcast out, and in fact the FAA is not allowing any drones, commercial drones, to broadcast any ADS-B out. They're forwarding and moving towards remote ID only. So guys, I hope you found just a little bit of this information helpful. If you're interested in the full 470-page FAA docket, I'll put a link down below. I'll also put a link down below to the 4-page information about the flight over people in the different categories. Again, it's Adam with Aeroworks, and we'll see you on the next video.